In the gray stillness before dawn, when Providence's ancient houses gather the last of the night's mists against their porch lights and stoops, the shade of Howard Phillips Lovecraft, that somber artificer of dread, still seems to drift among the elms of College Hill. Here in these weathered streets and colonial mansions lie the origins of a life as shrouded in whispered secrets and cosmic terrors as any tale of his invention. The city, ageless, yet always decaying, presses in, a silent host to the dreams and nightmares that gave birth to the literature of cosmic horror. To recount Lovecraft's mortal passage is not to rehearse the familiar landmarks of biography, but to follow the trembling candlelight of memory into those lightless corners where fear awakens, and all that is most cherished is revealed to be but a thin veneer over the abyss. Beneath the oppressive gaze of Providence's 454 Angel Street, in rooms flush with Victorian gloom, Howard Phillips Lovecraft emerged into the world on August 20th, 1890. A solitary, only child, destined to walk in the gardens of twilight. His lineage stretched into the murk of colonial time through his mother, Sarah Susan Phillips, whose fair forebears traced the spectral thread of New England from the 17th century. His father, Winfield Scott Lovecraft, a traveling salesman, acquainted with the gold and silver luxuries of Gorham and Company, descended as rapidly as any Gothic character into madness. Confined to Butler Hospital by 1893 after a breakdown in Chicago, his mind and body racked by an affliction then cloaked in euphemism, but now revealed as paresis, a syphilitic decay of the brain. From that hour onward, the pall of hereditary doom and unnamed fears fell across the Lovecraft house. The young Howard, fostered by his mother, two aunts, and above all the formidable Whipple Van Buren Phillips, his grandfather, a successful industrialist, passed his childhood tethered to stories not of happy homes, but of unspeakable creatures and secret histories. Whipple, having known business successes and the grotesque riches of ancestral law, regaled the boy with extemporaneous weird tales in the Gothic tradition, forging a mind uniquely attuned to both classical beauty and the lurking rot beneath. Yet doom is not so easily dispelled. When Howard was 5, death came for his grandmother Rhode, plunging the household into a gloom of perpetual mourning. The sight of black dresses, funerary rituals, and the chill stillness of the old house lodged itself within him indelibly, breeding nightmares of winged night gaunts, whose leering faces and trident-wielding claws chased him through the endless dark. These spectral visitations would haunt the corners of his sleep, and eventually the prose he set to trembling page years later. Lovecraft's physical fragility and nervous constitution isolated him from ordinary play. Beset by maladies both real and spectral, nervous headaches, fainting spells, and what his elders called neurasthenia, he lurked at the edge of school life, attending the Slater Avenue School only by fits and starts, before, too soon, retreating to the solitudes of his grandfather's library. The boy's thirst for knowledge was feverish. He devoured the Arabian Nights by 5, donning the pseudonym Abdul al-Hazred, future author of the infamous Necronomicon, and haunting the boundary between childhood and the ancient myth. Soon Greek and Roman fables eclipsed the Oriental, and poetry. His poem of Ulysses, written at age 7, vied with his own early ventures in weird fiction. In these years, however, it was not only the antique world that seduced him, but the pace and promise of scientific inquiry. Chemistry, and above all astronomy, became the hidden galaxies of his mind. the basis for hectographed journals distributed among a chosen few, private revelations in an indifferent cosmos. Education for Lovecraft sprawled in uncanny directions. Occasionally, when health permitted, he returned to formal school, managing short tenures at Slater Avenue and later Hope Street High School, where proficiency in Latin and ancient history seemed to matter more than mathematics or modern languages, and where his grades in English sometimes lagged, a paradox for a boy who never tired of words. When illness or melancholia closed doors, private tutors stepped in, though even these came and went, their work eclipsed by Howard's greater love of self-directed reading among dust-laden volumes of the family library or the ancient stacks of the Providence Athenaeum. By night, beneath the cold radiance of stars, Lovecraft explored the mysteries of the heavens. Friendly with the Brown University astronomer, Professor Upton, he enjoyed the run of the Ladd Observatory, topping a considerable eminence about a mile from the house, his young mind lifting, just for moments, from the pressing anxieties that circled the family. But stability could not endure. In 1904, the inexorable forces of financial ruin, brought about by the collapse of his grandfather's business affairs and Whipple Phillips' sudden death, forced the Lovecraft family from their beloved Angel Street mansion to a cramped dwelling at 598 Angel, marking a fall from privilege that left Howard in despair. He wandered the city on ghostly bicycle rides, witnessing the indifferent sweep of the Barrington River and contemplating oblivion, only to find a terrible fascination, not in death, but in the bottomless mysteries of chemistry, the order of the planets, and the telescoping nightmares of his own mind. In 1908, on the very cusp of graduation, darkness closed in again. Lovecraft suffered the first of his major nervous breakdowns, forcing him from school, estranging him further from the mundane world, and barring him from the gates of Brown University, whose Gothic towers he could only covet from afar. Shame and disappointment, haunted by the unrelenting sense of his own inadequacy, drove him deeper into voluntary seclusion. He became, by his own bitter accounting, a recluse, a vegetable, who nourished strange roots only in poetry, science, and the nostalgia of classical literature. In this liminal existence, Providence became more than backdrop. It became the matrix of Lovecraft's psyche, a living ghost haunting his imagination. From the sloping gables of Jenky Street to the shadowed corridors of Benefit and Prospect, the city's ancient houses, crumbling churches, and ancestral graveyards bled into his fiction, giving it a palpitating atmosphere of antiquity, half real, half spectral. "I never can be tied to raw new things," Lovecraft confessed, "for I first saw the light in an old town. These are the sights that shaped my childhood dreams." The east side of Providence in particular, with its labyrinthine colonial lanes and ghostly elms, fostered a sense of time's vertiginous depth, a sensation mirrored in works like The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, where the apocalyptic sunsets glimpsed from Prospect Terrace, and the colonial mansions of Benefit Street partake equally in history and myth. The city, as if in complicity with cosmic horrors, resisted the encroachments of modernity and preserved, through poverty and neglect, a haunted grandeur immune to the flattening hand of urban renewal that blighted neighboring New England towns. Providence's somber geography became, in Lovecraft's tales, a geography of the mind, stones and steeples carrying whispered memories of vanished glories. Graveyards, such as St. John's Churchyard, where Poe himself was reputed to have lingered, offering the only true communion with the past and the haunted dead. These spaces provided solace to the restless Lovecraft, a connoisseur of fear and death, who could only think deeply and clearly when at one removed from the pettiness of the living world, among rows of ancient slate tombstones and crawling shadows. Local history, sometimes learned, often merely felt, suffused every brick and chimney stack of Providence. Ancient houses, legends, and grim family names flowed directly into the world of Lovecraft's fiction. The Halsey House at 140 Prospect Street became the ancestral home of Charles Dexter Ward. The Shunned House at 135 Benefit, the seat of generational blight. The real and the imagined twined together in such tales with seamless artifice, so that the curious walker might find themselves, as in dreams, skipping across eddies of time and space, passing from the world of the living into the shadowed terrain of Lovecraft's cosmic dread. While the shadows of Providence lengthened about his housebound solitude, the young Lovecraft reached outward, not by foot or voice, but by the occult force of literature and correspondence. His grandfather's library, crammed with ancient marvels, provided entry to a rich tradition of weird fiction, the works of Edgar Allan Poe, which would forever mark his prose style and sense of atmosphere, the Arabian Nights, which seeded his Abdul al-Hazred fantasies, and the mythic age of fable that undergirded his later cosmic vision, notably the vision of Aram, the City of Pillars, and the enchanted realms of the Nights would echo in later stories such as The Nameless City and The Call of Cthulhu, their deserted cities and hidden horrors paralleling the moral lessons and terror of ancient tales. Denied entry to academia, Lovecraft found his path through amateur journalism, a vibrant subculture of the early 20th century where would-be writers, editors, and polemicists published hectographed magazines for their far-flung peers. After a 1913 letter to the Argosy, composed in rhymed couplets in defense of literary standards, he was noticed by Edward F. Dass, president of the United Amateur Press Association, and soon initiated into a community that would rescue him from utter oblivion. For nearly a decade, Lovecraft lived among epistolary shades, publishing his own periodical, The Conservative, and filling the letter columns of amateur journals with essays, poems, and columns of criticism. Here, in the sanctuary of ink and type, he matured as a public mind, his rollicking couplets and stately prose slowly giving way to the weird stories that would define his reputation. The flames of debate and the spirit of amateurdom kindled in him a new renewal to live, a renewed sense of existence as other than a superfluous weight, and found a sphere in which I could feel that my efforts were not wholly futile. It was in this lively seance of print that Lovecraft recommenced the writing of fiction, divining inspiration from such early prose pieces as The Beast in the Cave and The Alchemist. It was only with the prodding of allies like W. Paul Cook that he returned in earnest to the spectral stories he'd always cherished, composing The Tomb and Dagon in 1917, works shot through with morbid grandeur and cosmic dislocation. Even as his literary prospects rose, Lovecraft's personal world darkened. His mother's descent into madness mirrored that of his father's a generation before. In 1919, suffering from delusions and bouts of despair, she was delivered into the same chambers at Butler Hospital where Winfield had died, and where Susie herself would expire in 1921 after a failed gallbladder operation. Howard's devastation was keening, but brief. Soon the current of amateur journalism pulled him to Boston, where he encountered Sonia Haft Green, a cosmopolitan businesswoman and fellow writer who would become, for a time, the strange anchor of his earthly affections. Here begins the most deeply spectral chapter of Lovecraft's life. A sojourn not in Providence, but the teeming, oppressive labyrinth of Brooklyn, New York, a city he came to detest as profoundly as he had loved his ancestral home. After his marriage to Sonia in 1924, and a brief period of comfort in her Flatbush apartment, misfortune struck them both. Her business collapsed. His own attempts at employment ended in disappointment, and soon their union, strained by the hard hand of poverty and familial opposition, fractured under its own weight. Alone in a one-room flat at 169 Clinton Street, bordering the docks, Lovecraft succumbed to isolation, poverty, and the suffocating presence of what he referred to as hordes of foreigners. His letters from this period bristle with xenophobia and objection, with loathing for all the energies of modernity and diversity he found intolerable. Lovecraft's horror stories from these years, including The Horror at Red Hook and He, turned from the nostalgic beauties of New England to the bleak and misanthropic, depicting the city as a place of squalor, degradation, and occult menace, where the everyday might evaporate at any moment, replaced by more ancient terrors. As his dreams curdled, so did his fiction. Only the spectral pull of Providence could lure him back. By 1926, plans for return were made, without Sonia, whose hopes of joining him were foiled by the intransigence of his aunts and unresolvable marital malaise. Divorce became inevitable. Lovecraft retreated, as a wounded animal, to his own Lovecraft country at last. Thus did Lovecraft's shade reclaim familiar streets. Settling first at 10 Barn Street, ironically a house built by friends of the family, and later immortalized as the domicile of Dr. Willett in the case of Charles Dexter Ward, Lovecraft entered his most productive years, both as a creator of immortal terrors and as a gentle mentor to a circle of younger writers like August Derleth, Donald Wandrei, Robert Bloch, Fritz Lieber, and others. These Providence tales shine with the mists and obsessions of his home city. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, written soon after his return, broke new ground in literary horror, fusing elements of cosmic dread, modern science, and ancient myth in a way no one before or since has equaled. Its dreamlike origin, a vision of bas-reliefs sculpted in sleep, is said to have taken its first shape from a feverish dream Lovecraft himself had experienced, set in a Providence Antiquaries Museum, reminding us that for Lovecraft, the boundary between fact and fiction, waking and dreaming, was always tenuous, always haunted. In the years that followed, Lovecraft's pen summoned forth a bestiary of inhuman gods and forbidden books. At the Mountains of Madness, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Color Out of Space, and other dark classics were all conceived in the lonely rooms and twilight parks of Providence. Time and again, real sites were conscripted into his fictional landscape. The John Hay Library, with its trove of rare books and the world's greatest collection of Lovecraftiana. The Athenaeum, communal haunt of both Poe and Lovecraft. The Fleur-de-Lis building, transformed into a temple of abominations. And the Shunned House, gathering strange legends from the crypts and shadowed streets of the East Side. He was known about Providence in those declining years of the city's grandeur as a gracious, even courtly presence, walking late at night beneath the gaslights, posting letters and quietly observing the unmarked tides of human and inhuman history that ran beneath the cobbles. Lovecraft's ascetic, the unique abyss at the center of his life and work, is best described by his own axiom. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. It is not monsters or spectral limbs which terrify in his tales, but the rupturing of reality, the moment when mind must reckon with an indifferent cosmos and knows itself a speck among the black seas of infinity. Cosmicism, Lovecraft's central philosophy, posits humanity as fundamentally insignificant in the machinery of the universe. In this vision, there are no guardian angels, nor avenging demons, only alien gods, slumbering through eons, supernatural texts whose reading induces only madness, and generations haunted by an inexorable, impersonal fate. Against these immovable realities, humans struggle, realize the impossibility of knowledge, and all too often collapse into cosmic terror. Lovecraft's narrative art deepens this sense of helplessness. His use of fragmented point of view, unreliable narrators, and intersecting timelines creates a sensation of scholarly inquiry, overwhelmed by discoveries too profound to digest. Atmospheric description dominates action. Settings, swamps, crypts, abandoned New England villages are weaponized to inspire dread and amplify the erosion of certainty. His diction is deliberate, stately, often antique, evoking unease by merging the modern with the mythic. Suspense in Lovecraft is born not from gore or surprise, but from a consistent, slow unveiling. A creeping suspicion that reality itself is a lie, maintained only by ignorance. While his published works achieved only limited reach in his lifetime, most appearing in the pulp magazine Weird Tales or in amateur journals, Lovecraft's true literary legacy was sown in the garden of correspondence. He wrote, by some counts, over 100,000 letters. These epistolary exchanges with like-minded friends and aspiring authors spanned every topic, from the origins of human civilization to the most intimate afflictions of daily life. To these correspondents, Lovecraft was the Grandpa Theobald of Providence, dispensing advice, encouragement, and fierce debates in the manner of an 18th century sage. Many of those whom he befriended would, after his untimely death, ensure his rise from obscurity. Arkham House, the small publishing company founded for the sole purpose of preserving and sharing his tales, would become the mausoleum and nursery for his afterlife in literature. Beneath Lovecraft's measured courtliness and erudition, however, lay veins of profound sorrow and anxiety. Both parents had died in sequence in the cold sanitarium hours at Butler Hospital of madness and body's rot. Lovecraft himself, as he confided in a few friends, feared the hereditary fate that might claim his sanity and soul. He observed his own quirks and physical ailments, his inability to stomach certain foods, lifelong insomnia, and periods of intense anxiety as warning signs of inescapable degeneration. He was plagued, too, by poverty. Despite his reputation among the cognoscenti, Lovecraft remained, to his end, an outsider on the edge of destitution, scraping by with revision and ghostwriting work, supported by family and occasionally friends. The literary world, outside Providence and the circle of the weird, cared little for his genius. Only after his death would his stories reach a wider audience. In his final years, Lovecraft suffered increasing physical pain, culminating in the diagnosis of intestinal cancer. His letters reveal neither heroism nor terror, only resignation and a gentle humor amidst the unraveling of his earthly faculties. On March 15, 1937, at the age of 46, he died in Providence, the city whose bones and shadows had cradled and inspired him. His mortal remains were interred at Swan Point Cemetery under a headstone inscribed, by the devotion of fans years later, "I am Providence." In the end, to traverse the life of H.P. Lovecraft, much like to wander through his Providence, is to sense the impalpable, ever-present shadow of things just beyond comprehension, whether in library, graveyard, attic, or cosmic ether. Lovecraft's own biography dissolves into an uneasy blend of fact and reverie, loss and creation. He is at once an artifact of New England, a prophet of modern terror, and a caution against the overreach of knowledge, the decay lying behind all beauty, and the certainty that, even now, beneath the stones and trees of Providence, the past dreams, and sometimes awakens. Thank you for listening to this recording. Please consider liking the content and subscribing to our channel. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and suggest stories or poems you'd like to hear next.